Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. With unemployment at its lowest level in almost half a century, the battle for workers is intense, and it means some companies are promising big bonuses in an effort to retain and lure top-performing staff. But with inflation and costs soaring in an uncertain economy, can they afford it? Andrew Hanson is the Managing Director in New South Wales at Robert Walters, the global recruitment consultancy. Andrew, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
So, the Robert Walters Salary Survey, the most recent one, looked at the issue of bonuses. What's happening there? It just feels like people should be getting big bonuses, but are they?
Well, we're right at that point where we're starting to find out after the end of the Australian financial year, and it's absolutely an interesting time with us being at the tail end of, well, I won't say it's the tail end, I'm not an economic forecaster, but we're at the end of a very positive period for many industries here in Australia. And as such, with company performances being in some cases at record highs, there's absolutely been an expectation that people would expect bonuses in that period. So the answer is yes, absolutely. There's bonuses that are being paid. There's still people to find out whether bonuses are paid. It's really probably around this week where people would be finding out and probably paid within the next week after that. So we're still to find out in some cases. And then, of course, you have other companies that might be global that would work to a slightly different timeline and be paid later in the year. But yes, there are bonuses out there, but we are also aware of some circumstances where people are a little concerned that perhaps they might not see coming through what perhaps they expected come the next week or two.
But with remuneration structures, right, I mean, bonuses are great to talk about, but is it still as it has been for a long time where people get base pay and then generally bonuses, which depending on where you are on the ladder, obviously can be kind of a small percent of your base pay right through to multiples of your base pay? Is that generally how it's still working?
Look, Sean, I think it really does differ industry to industry. We're a white-collar professional recruitment consultancy. So many of the industries that we work with do operate bonus system of sorts. Of course, in financial services, for example, it's far more prevalent than it might be in other sectors like perhaps healthcare or indeed construction and so on. But the answer is dependent on industry. There has been a big shift, in particular, say in financial services, where less of the overall compensation is made up by bonus and less of it being about reward by a big bonus for 1 year's delivery, because much of what's done in financial services, the value of what's been done may play out over a period of time. So regulatory forces have forced a change there. But yes, in many of the sectors we recruit into, bonuses are a part of compensation. But I would say that over time, they've become slightly less important in the overall makeup of compensation.
Do they work? I mean, I have worked in jobs where I got a bonus and it was great to get a bonus, but I didn't really work for a bonus. Like, you know, if you're sitting there in December, I'm not thinking about my bonus the following July or August.
So, yeah, annual bonuses obviously are a little more difficult. And again, it's going to be dependent on the type of role. If it's a revenue generating role, if it's a role that's linked to performance of bringing in a certain amount of profit over a period, then I think that naturally that is something that people expect in those types of roles. And I do think they work because people are working towards a particular sum over a period of time, and they can be very motivational. Having said that, in other sectors, I think, and we've seen some big names come out of more recent startups that have become unicorns, where they're talking about it not being a culture where they want people to be working for a bonus, and that they're working to do the best job they can all the time, and that therefore their compensation package, inclusive of all the benefits that they get, should reflect that, as opposed to, you know, something that happens once a year.
So those unicorns that you're talking about generally are tech unicorns. Just if you look at the industries, the white-collar industries that you look at, is it the tech area where compensation is growing fastest?
Well, it's funny you should mention that. I think more recently, with the market changing quite rapidly, in particular in the US, there's been a pretty big shift. So there's been some significant falls, in particular in the tech sector and in startups, where listed companies are now valued significantly less than they were previously. And so there's some different forces at play with venture capital and private equity-backed businesses that have much lower valuations now. And for many that join these types of businesses, the equity or stock in a business like that would form part of a compensation package for the individual. So that in itself is one particular area of the market where there's definitely been some change in terms of how people are viewing their own circumstance, i.e., this is what I'm worth now because the stock of the firm that I've joined, where I have X percent or X number of shares, is now worth significantly less. So yeah, we've been speaking a lot with clients and candidates where that shift has potentially or starting to see a bit more talent come to market where perhaps they were beholden to the firm previously because of the value of their stock, but that's changed in the short term.
I hadn't thought of that. I mean, that must free up the market somewhat if a share price has gone from $10 to $5 and the strike price of their options is $5.50, suddenly not so attractive for them to hang around with that tech company.
Look, it is, but I won't say, unfortunately, as a recruiter, and I'd say between a third and a half of our consultants are facing into tech and transformation. We unfortunately haven't solved all of the problems for our clients with the talent shortages that exist out there. So yes, we've definitely seen two things happen. One is people giving consideration to where they are now and whether it's all that it's made up to be. We've seen some big names. I mean, one that comes to mind is that had been in the press was Klarna, for example, that have come out and said that they'd made a significant reduction in headcount and that they were cost focused. And any firms that were aligned with or that are aligned with crypto, we've seen quite a bit of movement in terms of downward headcount pressure on some of these businesses. But we're still experiencing and witnessing a talent shortage in many of the areas across technology and transformation.
Stay with me, Andrew. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Andrew Hanson, Managing Director, New South Wales at Robert Walters. Okay, so where are technology and transformation, where else are there talent shortages? And you're not allowed to say everywhere, because when we have an unemployment rate of 4.5%, the obvious answer is that there is shortages everywhere. But where are you saying particularly harsh?
For us, many of the sectors that I am absolutely aware, and I'm looking at the data that's coming through outside some of our core areas of focus, but certainly in the healthcare sector, we know that there are massive talent shortages. Not that we do a lot of work specifically in that world, but we know there is construction. We know transport, storage, manufacturing, and retail are the sectors that come up that have the biggest concern at the moment when they've been surveyed in the March to June quarters. So those areas in particular are the ones where we're witnessing the biggest talent shortages. And I think the most impactful and the biggest reported is around healthcare and the aged care sector.
Those sectors which are traditionally lower paid than some of the other white-collar sectors, how does an operator, they need people to look after in aged care, they need people in healthcare. The economics of it says that they're going to have to pay more. Can they afford it is the first question. Do they actually do that? Do they actually pay more, or do we just seemingly have this inevitable shortage of nurses, for example?
Absolutely. Well, before I speak on that, one sector that I probably should also include is hospitality. And I think a lot of us has probably witnessed this ourselves in our daily life. And through friends and others that I know in the industry, perhaps I've better anecdotal evidence to talk about what challenges that exist there with that lower skilled workforce and where wages are, that whilst people might be paying up to 50% above award for people to work in hospitality, for example, in a restaurant, in a pub, they can't afford to go any higher than that. A lot of places are limiting their hours of service, whether they're not able to open for lunch or they've got a limited number of heads that they're bringing into. I spoke to one mate the other day who runs a successful chain of small bars in the city, and they've had to limit the number of people that they can bring into a venue. They could take 120, they're only letting 70 in. So, look, I'm not particularly well qualified to talk about healthcare, so I won't, but I will say that honestly, I'm not sure businesses can afford to pay what they might need to. And of course, there's that supply and demand. If there's X number of people, then the market's relatively efficient, but there's a point at which it stops. And we've got a challenge both in terms of some of the unskilled labour and then at the other end of the spectrum, clearly at the skilled labour end as well.
Do you have a solution to it all, Andrew? Is it about No, that wasn't supposed to be a funny question. Is it about upskilling? Is it about doing things better? Is it about even for individual candidates? I'm sure as an individual candidate, you can negotiate harder. Is it just the market, so we just have to get our way through it?
No, and apologies, not a funny question at all, but a particular challenge at the moment, and I just mused on the fact that I wish I had all the solutions. But what I will say is that I think my take is that in the short term, so in September, the government and the unions and business will come together for the jobs and skills meeting, and I think that I read from the Treasurer saying the other day that there were ideally going to be and hoping that they'll find consensus between business, unions, and the government. And I reflected on that and thought, well, my advice would be I don't think at this point in the short term, and certainly with regards to skilled migrants, and I know there's been lots in the press recently about the 60 odd thousand offshore skilled migrant applications that we have for visas that the government are looking to try and process significantly faster than they are at the moment. I mean, that's clearly one positive step we can make to attend to the skills shortages that we have in the market at present. And I do believe that there's more that we can do in the short term to look to migration for some of those. Outside of that, clearly, it's a much wider thing on education, on training, on reskilling our people. And I guess whilst we've got talent shortages currently, we continue to move forward with technological advances. Roles are changing, and some of the skills that we have need for in the market today will change. However, some of those skills, or some of the people that are doing those roles, will be able to reskill to do some of the roles that are needed down the track. I don't think it's all about the fact that headcount will reduce in every role across every sector, but I do think that the skills are going to be needed in 3 to 5 years' time will be different in many ways than are needed at the moment. So I think it's a combination of all of those things between what we're doing here in terms of how we're educating our workforce, how we're reskilling people, and how we're training, and then at the same time trying to think about where we have those gaps. And it is about identifying those gaps and being very targeted as to where we would look to overseas individuals and migrants to come and fill those shortages. And they exist now, and my concern is that waiting till September and then onward from there to get going on some of this is a concern for not only for me as a recruiter, where I'm trying to help my clients solve their talent problems, but I know it's also for a lot of business leaders that I speak to every day as well.
Andrew, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Wonderful, thank you.
That was Andrew Hanson, Managing Director, New South Wales at Robert Walters. This is a Fear and Greed daily interview. Remember, you should get professional advice before making any investment decisions. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.